Hello, friends. Well, we now live in a world where, rightfully so, more attention is being paid to the harm done to our women and girls. But efforts aren't nearly enough to curb gender-based violence, right? But nevertheless, the fight continues. And amid all the noise, we hear the odd murmuring about men who are suffering too. Sometimes their attackers are other men, and more we're hearing stories of men who have or are suffering at the hands of the women in their lives. Yes, the women in their lives. Today on Syntropy, we're telling a different story. Not one of me too, but one of HeToo, a man's trauma. Martin Pelders is the founder of Matrix Men. That's an organization that seeks to help male survivors of sexual abuse and trafficking. And it all began with Martin's very own story, which he's going to share with us today. Martin, welcome to Syntropy, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Yvette. What an introduction. I'm like all emotional here.
Yes, we like emotion on Syntropy, so feel free to be yourself, Martin. So let's start with your story. Tell us about what happened to you as a child.
Yeah, I mean, it started when I was 5 years old. So my earliest memories are of a woman performing oral sex on me at 5, thereabouts. It sort of continued in sort of 8, 9, 10 years old. I got molested by other men. At 12, I was raped by another woman. And then another man sort of came into my life and kept me entrapped until I was about 19. So for me, at that stage of my life, going to the army and doing my 2 years military service was like a lifesaver. It was the first time I got out of a house where I had an extremely narcissistic mother who was very controlling and manipulating. I got away from the man that had been involved in my life since I was 13, 14 years old. And it was the first time where I was on my own and I could start making my own decisions. A lot of stupid decisions, but, the Air Force was a great time for me. And I began to live a life of dysfunction because of my childhood.
I want to come back to the impact of that childhood, sure. But let's go back to when you were 5, and I'm not sure if you are willing or okay to divulge who the woman was, what was happening in your house.
Well, that's the thing. It's a memory. So it's like a snapshot. This is the problem with flashbacks. Sometimes it's not a video that plays out in your mind. It's just a picture. It's an image. So what I can say is that my mom used to fiddle with me in the bath, which she used to wash me, and then she had this obsession with scrubbing you until you were like red. It's like you're not clean enough, and she would scrub your back and behind your ears for some reason. I could never understand that. And she would do it until you were like on the verge of bleeding, and then she would stop, and then she would play with my penis, essentially, until I got erect. And I mean, you're 6, 7, 8 years old. I mean, you don't actually understand what's going on there. And then she would go, "Oh, my little big man," and then leave me and just walk out, So I would then, as I got older, I started sort of trying to bath earlier in the day, so that I could avoid that. And I don't know how she did it, but she would always come home early. Sort of like almost she had a telepathic connection to me. Yeah. Martin's bathing now, let me go home quickly. It was the weirdest thing. And then I would hear that it was like this thing would play out in my head later in my 40s when I began recovery, of her coming into the house and me going, "Oh God, no," and trying to wash and finish and get out of the bath. And then hearing a coin or a key or something go into the lock on the bathroom door, and it's like and open. I could hear that sound, man. It's still loud in my head today as it opened. And she would come in. She would take her shirt off and put it on the toilet. Always like, "Why are you taking your shirt off?" "I don't want my shirt to get dirty." And it was like at the end of the day, it's like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, it's done. But these are the things that come to you.
So you had that conscious thought at that age of.
No, at that age I didn't. That only came to me in my 40s when I was going through this recovery. Why are you taking your shirt off? I mean, it's really weird. But anyway, that was my childhood. But she was also very angry. She was a very angry woman. She used to wear like these leather and wood clogs. I don't know if you remember them, that you'd slip your feet into.
Yeah.
And if we did something wrong, boy, one of those things would come flying across the house.
So it wasn't the flip-flops, it was the wooden clogs that you'd catch it with.
Yeah, flip-flops weren't even invented in those days, I think.
So Martin, I mean, and I'm going to apologize if it sounds like I'm being voyeuristic or I'm asking something very sensitive. But was your mother that woman then? The woman that you had that memory of the oral sex? Or was that another woman? Or you don't know?
I can't
but
tell
for
you
sure,
honestly,
you know that your mum used to do this to you in the bath.
In the bath,
And for how many years did this go on?
Well, from 7, and I don't think around 10 it must have stopped.
Why?
I don't know. Yeah, it's just like, I think she had a preference for boys of a certain age. I don't know.
Did you have siblings? Did you have brothers, sisters?
Yes, yeah, I've got 2 brothers. Yeah.
And do you know if the same thing had happened to them, if she'd done that to them as well?
They're not telling me.
Did you ask?
Yes.
And?
No.
So they're not telling you?
I know something happened to them.
Are they older than you or younger than you?
Older than me, yeah. I was the youngest by 5 years. So I know something happened to them, but they're not divulging, and that's their journey. You know what I mean? I'm not going to force them to talk about it. It's up to them.
And where was your father in all of this?
He was absent. Now, he was home, but he was absent. Man, my dad would spend as little time in the house as he possibly could because of my mom's crazy mood swings and the controlling and, all that sort of stuff. I mean, I can remember this, like her... She controlled the finances, and she was very proud of saying that she was the minister of the finances in the house, So my dad's salary got paid into an account, and she controlled it. And I can remember the arguments and the fights on like Saturday morning was hell in our house, where he would go and ask her for 10 Rand for petrol for the week, and she would have an absolute freaking meltdown. And there would be this huge fight, and it was like that every Saturday morning. I mean, it was just like, why? I mean, get over it. He's going to ask you for the $10. Just give it to him, or but it was that whole control thing that narcissists like doing.
So what do you think was the dynamic there? Was your mum mentally unstable? Would she have a mental illness? I mean, if we look back now, you could throw around many terms. You could talk about bipolar. You could talk about schizophrenic. Had she been abused herself as a child?
I don't know. I mean, that was, in terms of my recovery, one of the things for me to talk to her again was that I wanted to know why. That's all. And I sent her eventually like my 50th letter that I'd written without saying die bitch or, something like that. Eventually there was no expletives and there was nothing there. So I thought, okay, I can send this and let's see, And I sent it to her. And one of the things I actually stated in that letter was don't blame other people for what you did to me.
Yeah.
And what did she do? Exactly that. She's like, your effing father and his bitch wife and, all that sort of
stuff.
So
they were eventually divorced?
Yeah,
your parents?
Yeah. So when I was 18, they divorced. I was in matric. And I was actually happy when my dad said, yeah, I'm moving out. I was like, yes, I can finally get away from him. And he went like, no, you can't. I'm moving into a hall. My dad was a scoutmaster and he moved into the scout hall and he lived there for about 2 years because he gave her everything eventually which is funny because that happened to me, later in life. And so he said, no, you can't stay with me. There's no showers. There's no kitchen. There's no, I get fed at work. And so I was like, oh, Dad, come on. I just want to get away from it. Anyway, I stayed there and things got worse then. I didn't think they could, but they got worse.
Tell us about you spoke of other men. You spoke of what happened. How did they come into your orbit? What happened?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we jumping way ahead here. So, yeah, when I was 12, this is the weird thing because it's not deemed to be rape if you're a boy, you know?
Yeah.
So I was on holiday. We went to a specific place in the mountains every year as a family. And, my father and the brothers. And my mother she came once and she never came again, thank heaven. So, And we would go down there. And the family that owned the property, there was 4 daughters and mother and father. And my dad, we were much older. My brothers were out of the house at that time, and I was now 12. And I remember I'd finished primary school. I was just going into high school, into grade, what do they call it, 8 now? So, 8.
Yeah, grade
right.
8.
And I was down there. My dad said, look, I have to do some work in Joburg, which I know now he was coming back to visit his girlfriend, which, I mean, he was still very secretive about that. Anyway, so he left me down there for like a week. And I was the same age as the youngest daughter, or she was a year older, thereabouts. And then there was the second daughter who was at the time about 17, 18, right? And that night, it was just an evening and there was a whole bunch of youngsters and they were all drinking. I didn't even drink at that time. It was just like, they were having fun. I got bored because, when people get drunk, they tell the same stupid jokes over and over again.
Yes.
So I decided, well, I'm going to go to bed. And the youngest daughter had gone sort of a half an hour before me. And I went up and I was sleeping in the same room. It was a rondavel. All the sisters slept in the rondavel. And so I went into bed and I fell asleep. At some point in the evening, the older sister came in and just climbed into my bed, and she had no clothes on. And she kind of just started touching me, and I felt boobs. Wow, gee.
And you were 12 at the time, yes?
12,
Remind us, yeah? Okay.
I was 12, and I had these boobs, and then she kind of pulled me over, and boom, 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 5 seconds, done. Right? I'm 12. Let's face it, I'm no wizard in bed. And then she climbed out, and then the younger sister said, "Oh, that's disgusting." So she'd heard all of this, and I was like, "Oh, now I'm embarrassed, right?" Anyway, she just went off, went to bed, and I lay there. I couldn't sleep, and eventually I climbed out of bed, and in the rondavel, instead of opening the door, I went through the window. I can remember the window went right down to the floor, and I just puked my lungs out. I just puked the whole night. I just threw up. It was crazy. And I got back into bed, tried to sleep, went out, puked, came back in again. And I just couldn't understand all of this. It was just this thing. Now, I mean, it wasn't like I was not sexually
curious. Yeah.
No, well,
aware. Were you aware?
No, I mean, I was like being abused. So I was being sexually abused anyway. Yeah. So sex was kind of second nature. But it kind of felt to me that she'd robbed me of that opportunity for me to pick who I...
Make the choice.
She took that choice away from me. But I never deemed it to be rape, and nobody ever spoke about it being rape. But then when you think about it, I was 12, under the legal age. In those days, it was 18, So, but you live with it. And I can remember going into high school with all the young boys, testosterone driven. I mean, it's like sprouting hairs, and then all they could talk about was sex, And I was like, man, you guys don't know what you're talking about. This is such rubbish, man. I know what sex is really like, and it's gross. It's, So they thought I was weird. So I kind of just separated myself. And the weird thing is that I kind of formed alliances and friendships with other broken boys.
Yeah.
And we just had our own little clique, and we all started smoking and drinking, and we were like the rough-acts, And that kind of gave me an insight in the older years, I always say that my childhood was my university. I don't have a degree in psychology or anything like that. But I guarantee you, when it comes to male survivors of sexual abuse, I know more than most psychologists, psychiatrists.
Absolutely.
I just understand how they think and how they feel, that sort of thing. So...
That's fine. We can go on.
Cool. I mean, you're just letting me rant on here. So.
I don't want to know. There was a bit of a ping, so we're just trying to figure where that came from. But it's fine. No, carry on. Carry on with that.
So, I mean, and that was the thing. And then when I was sort of 13, 14, again, my father's just absent and I don't blame him for it at all. Oh my God, I would have escaped too. She was a terror to live with, an absolute horror. And he tried. He really tried. My father, if it wasn't for him, my dad is like a full-on empath. You have to be. I mean, if you're going to marry a narcissist, right? And he is such a kind, such a generous. And when I speak to him now, as I always say to him, Dad, if you could do your life again, because he was an electrician, right? Yeah. If you could do life again, what would you do? He said, I'd become a child psychologist. I'm like, why?
Is your dad still around?
Yeah.
And your mother?
91. Yeah, she's 90. Yeah. Fortunately, she stays in the Netherlands, so I don't have to. Anyway, so my dad, he's always had a heart for helping young guys, and not in a weird way like most people thinking, you're a scoutmaster.
Okay.
But he was one of the good guys, And if it wasn't for him, I think my life would have turned out totally different.
And the men who sexually abused you, who were they? How did they end up in your space?
Yeah, I don't know. So at 8, 9, I can just remember a guy came and stood next to me, and he just started touching my penis. I mean, it was like, Do you know where you were? Were you at home? Were you out? Nothing. It's just a flashback. Just a flashback. And then another guy, same sort of thing. I don't know if I was in school. I don't know where I was. I honestly can't remember that. But he came and he didn't just grab my penis over my pants. He actually shoved his hand down my pants and started grabbing me. And that was like, wow, and there were a few more incidents. I started thinking like I had like, hey, victim.
I was just going to ask, did you ever ask yourself, and I don't know if you were feeling this at the time, because you say a lot of this came back to you in your 40s and you had that aha moment that this was happening with you. Was there any point when you were a child and a teenager that you thought, this is odd, why does this keep happening to me? Or did those questions come to you in the flashbacks in your 40s?
In my 40s.
Okay. So at the time you didn't think, you felt uncomfortable, but you didn't.
Exactly. Okay. But that was my normal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is where I'm going. Like, often people go like, why didn't you talk about it? And like, I didn't know it was wrong. Did
you ever come close to, even at that time, saying, Dad, Mom did this to me in the tub. I'm not sure. Nothing didn't occur to you. You didn't think that you had to have this conversation?
That's what moms do.
Yeah.
They come,
teach you to wash yourself
scrub
properly.
the hell out of your back and your ears, and then play with your penis. I mean, that's normal. So, it's just weird. I mean, there were other incidents as well. So when I was older, at like 13, 14, weird thing, I'll get into that. So being young and being so far removed from my siblings, right? 5 years is quite a gap when you're that young. I was very alone. I was very lonely growing up as a kid. I mean, up until a point, sort of 10, 11, I was always trying to hang around with my siblings and my cousins. But, they'd drag me along as needed be. And I wasn't too bad then. But then when my brothers moved off to the army and out of the house and that sort of thing, I just felt I was so lonely. It was crazy. And eventually these two young guys moved in across the road from me. And I was so excited because they were kind of my age. Yeah. And I went over and I made friends with them. And I met the mother. And boy, was that a den of iniquity. That house.
What was happening
God.
There?
That's where... like all the tragedies happened in my life. That's where I met Gary, the guy that abused me from 14 to 19. That was where, again, there were parties there where guys would just feel me up and grab me. It was like a free-for-all, you know what I mean? It was crazy. And I never quite understood. I didn't stop going there because I was so desperate to be friends with my two mates, the sons. And I just kept going there, but there were these parties and they'd invite me over and there'd be all these weird people there, And, I mean, and the weird thing is that years later, in fact, it was about 7-8 years ago, I got a letter from my friend, the son, and he says, I've been watching what you've been doing. He says, do you know what was happening in our house? I was like, no. He says, my mom used to have sex with us in the bed with my father lying next to us.
What?
Yeah. He
What?
says every night, not just occasionally, every night she would swap between the two sons.
And the father would just
lie there,
awake, drugged, drunk,
making as if he's sleeping. I don't know. He didn't drink, And the weirdest thing is that I was so close to the father. I used to sit and I used to pour my heart out to him. He was actually such a nice person. I used to talk to him for hours and hours, and his way of escaping his narcissistic wife, right, the mother who's sleeping with his sons,
Goodness.
I mean, weird, right, was to just build and make things. So from the day they moved into that house, he started building, and he didn't stop until the day he died.
Martin, I have to ask, where did you grow up? I'm having visions of Elm Street. How could all of this have been happening in the same place? I'm sorry. I mean, I don't even want to be. You think like, how can all of these kids be going through this and these women be like this? Yeah. What was this? Like a cursed street? Dean. What was it?
Middle class white suburbia, West Dean, Johannesburg. Yeah, that was So when I looked at it, I was like, in my street, 5 boys were being molested or raped by their mothers. Yeah. At
that time. And the dads seemed to have had the same, I don't know what it was. They were in the same space, same place.
Yeah, so empaths were totally removed from it or trying to ignore it and, crazy. Yeah.
And those boys now, are they part of your treatment? Do they come to you for help, the friends from...
So the oldest brother's moved over to China. The youngest brother's an addict. So he's out in the streets in South Africa somewhere, apparently aside 7 or 8 children from different women. And we can't find him. I've looked for him. I've actively searched for him. Can't find him.
So, Martin, you say this sort of came to you and you made sense of all of this when you were in your 40s. That seems to be the moment. What do you think happened in your 40s to make you realize that this is what had happened to you as a child and make sense of all of that.
Yeah,
and did you ever question, am I imagining this? Am I making this up? Did these things really happen? I'm sure all of that must have run through your mind.
No.
Eh?
No.
Didn't. You trusted.
I suppressed those memories 100%.
So you trusted that they were genuine. I'm just playing devil's advocate, where somebody goes, he's hearing all of these things. Maybe he's just put himself in that position of that child.
No, you suppress those memories. That's what your mind does that to help you live.
What unlocked them?
That was, so I gave up drinking when I was about 42. So I became an alcoholic from the age of 13. I would binge drink every weekend. And then when I got into my 20s, it was just like drink. And I just drank more. When my daughter was born, I was 35. She was born then. And that was the worst moment in my life.
Why?
I promise you. My ex-wife and I tried for 10 years to have a child, right? We tried everything. I mean, we went through infertility treatments and all sorts of things. It was a traumatic. That's just a whole other drama in itself, So eventually this miracle child happens, right? And she's born, and I'm changing a nappy one day, and this little devil pops up on my shoulder and says, "You're going to hurt her." And I was like, "Huh? What the hell?" And then this little angel pops up on the other shoulder and goes, "No, you're not. You love her too much." And she said, "No, you're going to stick a finger in there." And the other one's, "No, you're not." And then I was like, I couldn't deal with that. I was starting to go schizo, So I just I walked out. I said to my ex, "Just sort it out, please." And then I would have come home and sort of had a double tot of gin and kind of downed it just to take the edge off. It's what alcoholics do, taking the edge off. Then from that day on, I would come home and just pour a glass full of gin and drink it. And I would get drunk fast enough so that I wouldn't have to take care of my daughter because I was so afraid that I would do something to her.
Did you understand where that was coming from at the time? And not just go, what's wrong with me as a dad?
Didn't have a clue. You
didn't relate it back? And
didn't.
So at that point, you couldn't have gone, am I just like my mother? Am I just like this person? Because you didn't
even think of it. I just thought, why the hell would I want to hurt my daughter? I love her so much. I've tried so hard to have a family. Now I've got this family, and why would I do that?
So when did it all become clear to you?
Yeah, I got to add one more thing in there. So when I was 37, right? So my daughter's now about 2, right? And I'm sitting in my bedroom and I'm looking through the door into the nursery where my ex is sitting with my daughter. And I'm like, oh, proud daddy, she's a beautiful girl, And the phone rings and I pick up the phone and I hear this voice that just reaches through the phone and grabs my heart and squeezes it like an ice hand, I just knew straight away it was Gary, the guy that had kept me entrapped from 14 to 19, 13 to 19. And he was like, "Hi, Martin." And I knew that voice and I just what do you want? "No, I've missed you," he says to me. We were such good friends and I want to see you again. I just sat there and I didn't know what to do. My head was spinning. It was it's like you're in a tunnel with water going, and I'm just I'm baffled. And I looked through the door and I saw my daughter and that just galvanized me. And for the first time in my life, I told him off. For the first time in my life, I just said into the phone, I said, "Stay away from me, you." I swore, and I called him a pedophile. I said, "If I see you within 100 meters of my house, I will rip your throat out."
And how many years since when last did you see him before this?
When I was 19.
And how did he even find you?
I don't know.
That must have been very freaky and scary and terrifying.
Very, because I'd lived my life from when I went into the Air Force. I'd lived my life. I used to change jobs and address every single year.
Yeah.
Because I was now I realize I was trying to avoid that, right? I was trying to avoid him finding me. And he found me. So it turns out that for some reason, Telkom published my phone number in there. We used to have those things.
The directories, yes, of course.
Those big white things that we used to
What
get.
a monster to actually actively go out and look for you.
Yeah. So then, so it all starts changing. I get 42. I got snort drunk. I was pass out drunk. It was my brother, now my stepbrother, because my dad remarried. I got so drunk, and I woke up in the morning at 4:30 or 5 o'clock. I can't remember, in my garden, butt naked, with one sock on my left foot. I don't know why the one sock, but anyway. And I was lying on the lawn like this, and there was a dog turd, a fresh one, planted right by my nose.
Oh, dear. Okay.
Everything for a good reason, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of got up and I walked into the house and I walked down the passage. So my house, I can remember, had a very long passage. I walked past the spare room and then my daughter's room. And as I walked past there, I looked down at myself and was like naked with this one sock on and leaves and grass bits stuck to me. And like, I just looked and I thought, what if your daughter woke up and saw you like this? And that was it. That instant, I decided I'm not drinking again.
Just like that?
Just like that. And I stopped. And I didn't touch. That was about 15 years ago now.
Wow. So we have a dog turd to thank for that also.
Sorry?
A dog turd to thank for that also.
Exactly.
Almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You see,
Sorry, yeah.
everything is like everything has a plays a role, right?
But that's a moment.
And I stopped drinking. But the thing is, then I became what we call a dry drunk. So I was just an idiot. I was just depressed. I just lay around on the couch all the time. I was a horrible person. Seriously. I mean, I was on edge all the time. It was terrible. I started cycling and became quite good at it, actually. I realized for the first time in my life that I was quite athletic and that I was quite competitive, crazy competitive, in fact. But then, life didn't change. I went to AA and I did the 12 steps and life didn't change. And one day I came home from work and sat down. It was the Oprah Winfrey show. And I had a show called The 200 Men. And I sat there, and Tyler Perry actually set that up with Oprah. And in that studio was 200 men that were talking about me. I couldn't understand the weirdest, freakiest thing that ever happened in my life. They were just like, everything they said was like, I feel like that. That's me. Yeah, that's me, And I sat and I listened, and it's still, although all of them were saying, and then he raped me and I was sexually abused, it still didn't connect that I was a victim of sexual abuse. My brain was still like, no, resisting it. But then right at the end, one of the guys stood up and he said, and I just want to say this. Sorry.
That's fine. Take your moment.
My whole story doesn't bug me, but this one always gets me.
Take your time.
He said, if you're a father, you love your child so much that you will never hurt her. And that was like punch in the gut. And that's when I realized it, and I started putting it all together, But the weird thing is that for the first time in my life, I could actually take a full breath. I could actually fill my lungs. It was like a giant stood behind me and just lifted this 1-ton concrete block off my shoulders. And I could breathe. I could live. But, oh boy, then the pain started. Then those flashbacks started. And the memories came back. And, oh boy, I tell you, the next 6 months were intense. The last time that I ever thought of committing suicide was in those 6 months. So it's what we call a breakthrough moment, when you have something triggers you and you start remembering all this stuff and it just comes flooding back. It's like hearties opening after a 7-year drought, you know what I mean? And then you just have and all this garbage comes out and mud, and man, it was very intense. And I started remembering it. At that point, I still had suppressed the memories of my mom doing things to me. And I just, it all came out. But the amazing thing was that I could start living again, I started changing in terms of my character and my personality. I started finding hope and joy and, that sort of stuff. And then one night I was in those days, we still had dial-up connections. You remember those when you like to hit the modem and
oh yeah.
Yeah. And I would go on the internet, and instead of doing 4 to 5 hours of porn a night, I would spend 4 to 5 hours on a site called malesurvivor.org. It was all men. There was 9,000 men at that point on this site, and we would just tell stories and talk to each other in chat rooms and just, and I went on this one night and I started reading this story, and this guy had this story, and it's the weirdest thing, right? And I started reading, he says, and I was in the bath. I was like, what? You're in the bath? He says, yeah, and I hear these footsteps coming. And the door opens and I'm going, no, don't come in, don't come in, don't come in. And she walks in and she takes her shirt off. And I'm like, what? Now, at that point, I don't know if I was still reading or if a movie took over in my head.
Yeah.
I still don't know. And his story was exactly mine. The weird thing is I went back and I tried to find that story, couldn't find it again. But in my head, it was there.
Yeah.
I read that story,
Yeah.
you know, and I broke down. I just absolutely cracked up. And I was just like, then the reality started setting in. Your mother, who was supposed to love you and nurture you, care for you, she did all these things to you. And so it started there. She was the start of all the abuses that happened to me until the age of 19, and actually up until the age of 48, 49. You know, that's a different story, right? But all of this now started coming back, and I started remembering. I just started crying, and I just thought, that's it. I mean, if I was that bad that my mother couldn't even love me, I just want to end it. You know, I just, that's it. And I'd kind of planned out in my head that I was going to get a garbage bag and put it around my head. I was just going to fall asleep in CO2 poisoning. It's very peaceful, I understand. I don't know, I haven't tried it. Right?
No. Well, thank goodness.
Yeah. So anyway, that night, I can remember just looking up at the ceiling and I said, God, why did you let this all happen to me? I was just a child, you know? And the weird thing is this line, this sentence popped into my head that said, if it hadn't happened to you, who would go on to help others? And I was like, holy crap, you know, I'm too stupid to have thought of that myself. And that kind of changed me. And that night, Matrix Men was born.
Well, you know, you're a bigger person for that, because I'm thinking if that was me, I'd be like, but why me still? You know, why would I have to go through such pain to be able, surely I would have been able to help other people without having to go through this myself. But like I say, you're a bigger person probably than most others out there, and found your purpose. But I want to dial you back a little bit to just the impact, and you explained a lot of what happened in terms of, you know, what it did in the drinking and all of that. But in terms of your relationships, Martin, you mentioned an ex-wife. How were you able to forge those relationships, have a child of your own? I mean, you weren't aware at that time. Yes, you said the flashbacks came later on after your daughter was born and all of that. And it was your love for her also that made you sort of pick up the red flags and all of that. But just having a relationship, meeting a girl, deciding that this is the person you wanted to be with, and consciously making a baby in that subconscious. And I'm by no means, I'm not an expert, I'm not a psychologist, but I'm asking as a normal person, that there must have been that discomfort. And how do you think you went on to have relationships?
Yeah. So relationships, I can pretty much assure you that a belief. It's just a feeling I have, just like a wild poke in the dark, right? I think most really brilliant actors have suffered some form of abuse in their lives, because it kind of makes you... So I used to be the type of guy who would sit at a coffee shop, still my favorite hobby, right? Sit at a coffee shop and watch people. And in those days, I used to see somebody walking and I'd go like, oh, I like the way he walks. And I would assimilate that into my personality. Okay. So I would take on portions, or when I met somebody and I was like, wow, I really like the way this guy handles himself. And I would sit and I would observe him, study him, and then assimilate that.
So you made like a Bionic Man. You took on these little bits. I'm not going to say Frankenstein because people think as a monster, but you took bits and pieces of different people.
No, I was Frankenstein.
Okay. Absolutely. I didn't want to say it, but
no, absolutely. Right. So I was 5 very distinct different people. Very distinct, very different people. So I was like Church Martin. Oh, man, holier than thou. You know, could quote the Bible and everything in the right thing, right? And then there was Party Martin, who was like the piss cat and dirtiest jokes and all that funny guys.
Lying turds, almost. Okay.
Exactly.
So I still have that picture in my head. I can't get it out. Exactly. Okay. Right.
Right. Then there was Work Martin, who was like the consummate professional, knew everything, was the best in his trade, all that sort of stuff. And then there was Home Martin, who was just an absolute arsehole, angry all the time, depressed, upset, on edge, that sort of stuff. And then there was Family Martin. So in front of family, I was like the perfect husband, the perfect father. And the problem is that my daughter never knew which one would pitch up when. So she lived walking on eggshells all the time. So, but going prior to that, to get relationships, I would assimilate somebody, chat the girl up, and she would go, wow, this guy's amazing. So, but then, of course, through the course of time, she would get to know that this guy's a bit of a freak, right? Because I've been taught all my life that sex is love. So if you love me, you're going to sleep with me.
Yeah.
Right? So they would be like, no, I mean, especially when you're younger. So you're 16, 17, girls don't want to just sleep around in those days. Things have changed a bit. So they wouldn't just jump into bed with you, right? So when eventually I'd manipulated them and changed and boom, go sleep with them and then go, leave. Yeah. And eventually you kind of, I believe we all have these crises in our lives, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think for men, it's in sort of their mid-20s, right? Okay, now I have to conform to society. I need to get a wife, get a house, get children, get all of that sort of stuff. And women have the same thing. I need to breed now, that's the most fertile at those times. So in my mid-20s, I was like, okay, I need to find a wife now, I mean, I was depressed. I hadn't had a girlfriend for yonks, and I was badly hurt by the girlfriend that I did have. From 19 to 20 or 21, right? And I kind of avoided them. So for 3, 4, 5 years, I didn't have a girlfriend. And then eventually I met this girl, and I managed to wangle her, and she was my mother. Narcissistic, controlling, manipulative. And she actually ended up manipulating me into marrying her. And eventually it was like, oh, well, I mean, she used to say things like, well, we're sleeping together. You can't just leave me now. And I was just guilting me. So eventually I was like, okay, I'll marry her. Didn't love her at all. In fact, at one point I'd thrown her out. I was like, no, I don't want to be involved with you. But she managed to wangle her way back in again. Anyway, so we managed to have. So I was in a very narcissistic relationship. My ex used to constantly break me down. Constantly, she would tell me that I was useless, that I was stupid, that I was ugly, that I was, it was a constant. She used to slap me and kick me and all sorts of things as well. Yeah. But you kind of, again, as a man, you was like, no, she can't. She's a little girl, she can't hurt me. And but she would, and she was a very pained, very broken lady. I mean, her story is her story, and that's her privilege to tell if she wants to. And
but you got out.
Eventually I got to the point. I was 48, 49. I was like, I can't do this anymore. Okay,
I don't know I don't want to identify, in terms of your child. Was this the mother of your daughter, your eldest daughter?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So, So eventually we got divorced. She took everything again. So modeling my father, walked away and ended up staying in a commune in Honeydew. And, then she would be like, you can't see my daughter because you don't have a place for her to sleep. And then you can't see your daughter. So I missed out on her 13th birthday. I wasn't allowed to go. And it just carried on for 5 years. And the times that she would allow me to see my daughter had to spy on me.
Oh,
so she would take my phone, Dad, can I play a game? And then she would get numbers.
That's so damaging for the child also, being manipulated in that way.
Yes.
And now you're a grandpa.
And now I'm a grandpa.
And a dad again.
And a dad again, yes. So I remarried again, but no crazy narcissistic.
Okay. I don't want to ask, but you say that. You tell us. You tell us that you're happy and all is well.
Well, I mean, marriage is marriage and it's hard work. Everybody goes like, I'm just going to have this idyllic life, isn't it? And
well, then I think you were lying.
Yes,
okay.
Well, so my wife she's an incredibly loving, caring person.
I'm so happy for you.
Has her issues, which we deal with because we're adults. And
yes,
because
of course.
I've gone through this journey, I kind of understand.
How old are you now, Martin?
I'm 58.
Okay.
59. Yeah. So my wife is quite a bit.
And you have a 2-year-old.
Yes.
And a 2-year-old grandson.
And a 2-year-old grandson, yes. Yeah. So my daughter went out and had a relationship with a drug addict who, again, but fortunately, we've been in a situation where I can sort of talk into her life now.
Yeah.
So she's starting to grow emotionally and she's getting over things and we're very close now.
She's lucky to have you.
I'm lucky to have her.
And you're lucky to have her. She helped you as a baby also,
He's the cutest little guy. You know? And then my wife and I adopted a little boy. And we're adopting a little girl this year.
Oh, that's amazing. And this is where I want to bring in Paula Quinsee. She's a life and relationship coach. She's your friend, Martin, and our friend here on Syntropy. Hi, Paula.
Hi there. Good to be here.
You've been listening, and you know Martin's story very well. And in terms of, I've been asking him about his relationships and healing from something like this and the impact of something like this. Does somebody ever really completely heal from something like what Martin has gone through?
So, as a survivor of childhood abuse myself, no, you don't fully heal. You become less triggered. You're able to recognize the signs more in terms of, it's stuff from your past. And you learn how to forge better relationships in terms of what healthy attachment looks like versus dysfunctional or toxic attachment. And the more you do the self-work, the more you do the healing, the more you become comfortable in who you are and not use avoidance or negative coping mechanisms like alcohol, for example, is one thing. Addictions of all sorts, even sport is a form of addiction, you know, in terms of the way
just
we try
overdoing it on any level.
Absolutely,
for anything.
Because, you're seeking that validation, that you're okay, that there's nothing wrong with you.
And the instant gratification.
Absolutely, because you do start thinking it's you. There's something wrong with you, that you deserve this, that you've brought this onto yourself, especially at a child who's the innocent victim here that doesn't know right from wrong, who looks to the adult, because that's what we're taught, is the adults are the ones in charge that know right and wrong.
And for you,
and we get taught, well, especially our generation, don't back chat, don't question, you just do as you're told.
Okay. Well, Paula, you've thrown me for a 6, and I don't even know. I mean, I want to go back to the healing and relationship part, and I don't know if you, in all the time I've known you, I didn't know what you just told me now, that you're a survivor. Are you okay to tell us what happened to you? I know we're talking about men, but you are here, and I know that people listening are going to go, what happened to Paula? If you're happy to share that with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't want to steal Martin's thunder, because...
But it goes to the healing aspect. It goes to the healing part of it, and knowing exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I was 7 years old when my first experience or encounter happened. And over the years, it was also a number of different people. Started off with an uncle, and then a neighbor, the neighbor's son. And then there was a family friend that would come and stay with us. And then again, similar patterns. You think sex is the only way that you're shown love, or sex is love. Yeah. So you start to kind of think, well, that's the norm and that's okay. And so it's not uncommon for people that have experienced sexual abuse to become promiscuous.
Yeah.
Or because that's what we're taught, or that's what we're conditioned. That sex is love. Okay. And that's the only way you show love.
Okay.
That's what love is.
You're looking for love all the time.
Like
you get it from sleeping with people.
And so similar to Martin's story and pattern is I had a string of failed relationships because I didn't know what healthy attachment was. So you get attached to all those conscious and subconscious familiarities that you identify with in terms of growing up. And that's what got me into the work that I'm doing today in terms of working with couples. Is eventually I got to a point where a long-term relationship ended, and I had to go like, is it me? Why can I not sustain a healthy relationship? And I started my own therapy journey and my own healing journey. Sure. And then, so that's how my story started.
You two are amazing, just using what you've been through and speaking so openly about it.
The weird thing is when I met Paula, right, it was about 5 years ago, I think. Okay. So I was in something called the Human Library, and I was a book. So you go and you read through these books and you take out the human and you ask the story, and
So the person's a book.
The person's a book. Yeah. So instead of you get the person, you can ask questions in there. And she sat down in front of me, and I looked at her and I said, she said, so tell me your story. And I smiled and I said, I think you need to actually tell me your story. And she was like,
wow. And here we are 5 years later.
Yeah.
So we read each other that day.
We read each other that day.
Yeah. But that's just amazing, Paula. And, I want to, at this point, talk about the differences between men who are survivors and women, if there's a difference, because Martin from his story sounded like he had suppressed it. And I don't know if that's a male thing that men don't talk about it. Did you at any point when this was happening, you say you were 7, did you think to tell anyone? Did you know or feel that this was wrong? This shouldn't be happening to me now as a female of the species? Did you have a different reaction to what he did? I mean, the long term, as you say, failed relationships, all of that. But when it was happening and through those years, did you deal with it differently?
No, very much similar. So suppressed a lot of it. There is, in the back of your head, there's something like a nagging feeling, like this feels odd. This doesn't feel right.
Something's not right, yeah.
But because you don't have a benchmark to reference against, and you don't really have a safe place, or you think you don't have a safe place because of the shame and the embarrassment and the guilt and the feeling dirty and all of those things, you don't want to tell someone. And then when you do have the courage to tell someone, so years later when I was going through my own journey, I did try and tell my father at the time, and he dismissed it.
Is your abuser still around? Are they all? I mean, most of them.
I'm sure they are, but I haven't looked for them. I don't want to look for them.
You don't know if they're still friends with your parents? Or?
So both my parents are gone. So even if they are still around, I don't know where they are. And to be quite honest, I don't care because it's not about them. It's about my journey and my healing. But when I did tell my dad eventually, I tried to allude to it. He dismissed it and downplayed it as something that kind of, it was a once-off thing. And my dad, and I'm generalizing, stereotyping, but he came from that typical sort of gender where it almost felt like, well, it's women are subservient in terms of it's their duty, it's their obligation, and kind of, it's a man's right. It came from that sort of generation. And so that's what I was conditioned into believing, that this thing just happened, and it was okay.
It's no big deal.
Yeah.
And in terms of the healing from all of this, I want to know from both of you. I mean, there's no aha moment where you say, okay, I'm fine now, I know what to do. Is it a constant work in progress? Are you always, every day, waking up, making a conscious decision? This is how I'm going to, these thoughts are going to come. You can't help what's going to come into your head through the day, right? Most people can't. Is it a constant work? Every day you're working at this, Martin? Are you working at it every day?
Absolutely. You wake up every morning. Just that aside, the abuses and everything aside, I don't understand how any human wakes up in the morning and doesn't do this sort of thing anyway. So, often I get the guys come in and say, like, when I'm going to stop healing? When you die. Because essentially you need to be working on yourself on a daily basis because you want to be better than we were yesterday. And that's the same for me. It's just a little bit more intense. I have a hell of a lot more triggers that I need to deal with on a daily basis. I need to watch out for
what are they? Yeah.
Certain people. The other day I was at a meeting we're starting our own halfway house. And I was at a meeting with the guys, and I walked out, and this lady came in, and she said something to me, and it was like, my response to her was just angry. Bam, finished. When I walked away, I was like, oh, man, I failed. And I felt like going back and saying, I'm sorry, but I was too embarrassed and, silly. I'll meet her again, and I'll say, I'm sorry. But yeah, so I need to wake up every morning and say, I am going to be happy today. It's a choice, Healing is a choice, When you get to a point where you know that this happened to you, you can either carry on living a dysfunctional life or choose to heal. It's a choice. You have to make the choice, and it's hard work. It's painful, right?
You agree, Paula? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I always say life is a lifelong journey of learning. We never stop learning. The day we stop learning is the day we die, literally or figuratively. Definitely some of the triggers are still there. There's sometimes where I still find myself stuck in that freeze state, the fight, flight, freeze state. And that's a natural trauma response, and a protective response was to go stiff, because that's sometimes how I would try and protect myself, was just to go stiff.
Did you ever go out of yourself?
No.
Because a lot of people a lot of survivors say they kind of leave their bodies when this is happening.
You just try and numb it. You try not to think about it, that kind of thing. But there's still times where I've found myself like stiff, and then I'll go, why are you so stiff? What? Just chill, just relax. You're okay. You're fine. You're safe. There's nothing wrong here. So there are still times where I find myself in that, but I'm a lot more conscious and aware of it. But it is daily work, especially from a relationship point of view.
Yeah.
Because I think that's for me where the biggest triggers come from. I've suppressed a lot of I didn't have the traumatic or as much of the traumatic experiences that you had in terms of lifelong. I had incidences, but it wasn't to the depth that yours was. So and through therapy and all of that, I've dealt with that, and I'd like to say I've healed from it. But at the end of the day, we're all human, and the body absorbs trauma in so many different ways.
And that's what I want to ask is, how did this manifest for both of you? I want to know, because it must have been physically. I mean, did you ever question your sexuality, Martin, at any point? Because there were men and women involved, and your most base person, the person from whom you came, did this to you and violated you. And then there were men, and then there were people you thought who were your friends. And Paula, people you thought you were safe, your parents' friends, and even your parents couldn't protect you, downplayed it, made it nothing when you told him, your own dad. How did this, did it have an impact on your sex? I mean, you spoke about, manipulating people into having sex with you and sleeping with you, but did you question also your sexuality?
It's kind of a weird thing. I mean, we're going to jump back and forth here. So for me, sleeping with girlfriends was like, you love me. But then when they did sleep with me, right? So I deflowered many young ladies I'm extremely sad about what I did. I'm very remorseful about it. But I was looking for something and I wasn't finding it. So sex wasn't the answer. So I got to a point when I was about 16 where I thought, well, maybe I'm gay. So maybe, I'm happier with men. So I tried that lifestyle until about 23. And that's a very, that's a very different lifestyle, because it is just about sex and it's about partying and it's about drinking and drugs. And
there was no emotional connection for you.
There is no emotional connection. And a lot of people go around jumping from partner to partner. And I was lucky, and I was a scaredy cat, right? Honestly, I was a scaredy cat. So I wouldn't do hard drugs because I was afraid the police would catch me. So alcohol was my poison. And then fortunately in that era was like kind of the emergence of AIDS, HIV AIDS. So I didn't go into the full-on like gay lifestyle, jumping around from guy to guy and that sort of stuff, because I was afraid of AIDS, So I think that fear protected me in a very large sense. And it was actually on a beach in Cape Town with a guy who was on his knees, and I'll leave the rest to your imagination. And I kind of looked down at his head and I went, no, this isn't me. This is not right. And I plopped out and walked off and said, bye-bye. And he was like, you can't just leave me here. I was like, I'm sorry. This is not for me.
So it was bye-bye and bye-bye to the lifestyle, if I would put it
bye-bye to the lifestyle. So that was, again, confusion. But again, I mean, I got into a relationship where I didn't really love the person. I just got into it for sex and for companionship. It was only when I got divorced, you're 49, you've been in this loveless relationship, this war constant. And I went for 6 months of therapy.
What type of therapy? Because you laugh now. I have to ask, what was this?
I decided I was going to catch up for 21 years of
happiness.
So I was out there. I was playing the scene, and I was petting many young women.
Oh, that kind of therapy.
Yes.
Okay.
And then I met my now wife, and she was like, "No, you're not going to do that." I was like, but this is what I'm looking for.
What?
And she was like, no, you're not. I was like, oh, okay, this is different. But anyway, so, I mean, it wasn't just sleeping with women. It was like online chats and all sorts of things, right?
Okay.
And I'm such a doofus. I'm very bad at this. She actually had a little tablet that she said, I'll use this for work. And I was like, oh, okay. So I was chatting to a lady on the tablet.
Oh, that kind of tablet. Okay. I'm like, what pills was she giving you? That kind of tablet. Right.
That tablet. And this lady was sending me pictures. And one day I was in the shower and my girlfriend said to me, have you got pictures of? And I was like, yeah, on the tablet. And she opened it up and boop.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, she got these images. And again, everything happens for good, I believe.
Yeah,
so
I believe that.
She was very angry, of course, rightfully so. And she confronted me, and I was like, okay, I need to reassess my life now. I need to sit down and think about this. And then I went home and I sat there and I thought, what am I looking for? What am I truly looking for in a relationship? Is it that part of the woman's anatomy? Because at the end of the day, essentially all the same, right? Let's be honest. So what is it that I'm really looking for? And then I realized it was an emotional connection. And I realized that the only person that I'd actually had an emotional connection with was my girlfriend at the time, my wife. And she was still, she's still, no, you're going to wait 2 years and we're going to get engaged and we're going to be, she's very ordered and structured. And eventually we married. But yeah, and like I say, it's a work in progress, as always. But you know what? I have that emotional connection with my wife. I'm not constantly thinking about 5,000 other women. I am focused on her. I don't need anything else right now, and I'm happy with that.
Oh, that's amazing. Paula,
it sounds idyllic, but it's not that easy.
But it's a work. I mean, look, any relationship, like you say, is a work in progress. Absolutely. And you've got that little bit extra that you have to do. But I mean, I think from what it sounds to me, she's, also you're lucky to have her. She's lucky to have you as well. And Paula, for you, did you question who am I, my sexuality, what do I like? Did it affect you in that way, or any other physical way that it affected you, your body? Did you,
Most definitely.
What happened to you?
Most definitely. So one of my sort of coping mechanisms was I became a binge eater and then I would purge because I hated my body. But I couldn't understand why. I didn't connect it. I just knew that there was this thing about my body, and I guess it was a form of control, something that I could control. And so that was one of my things, was I became a binge eater and then I would purge.
So eating disorder, basically.
Eating disorder, I wasn't bulimic, but I would do that. And I guess it was maybe subconsciously a form of purging, getting rid of, but at the same time it was a form of control.
Did you hate your body? Did you think that it was your body that made people do this to you?
Yeah, I had huge body image issues, huge. And then...
You as well, Martin? Yeah. As a man, you hardly would ever think, okay, but Paula.
Yeah.
And then it was the connection, the emotional connection. I self-sabotaged my relationships because I would purposely, I guess, subconsciously create drama, and I would reject my partners. Okay. I would find reasons and excuses why this relationship wouldn't work and all of those things. And I was in my first long, serious, it was a 6.5-year relationship. And we ended up separating, ending the relationship. And at that time, I had started my therapy because I just felt that there was something missing. There was this void inside of me that I couldn't fathom what it was. There was something missing. I felt empty, numb, dead inside. And I was questioning, why couldn't I feel? What was wrong with me? So I started the therapy. This particular person that came into my life was probably the catalyst of it all. And I guess in a way, a soulmate of sorts, because he helped me through that therapy, brought me out of in being able to feel again and all of those things. However, I had self-sabotaged that relationship because back in my previous lifetime, as I call it, in corporate, I had taken out a bursary. I was studying for my degree. I'm the only person in my family to get a degree. There was never money to go to university. It wasn't an option back in the day. And I had neglected the relationship because I put all my focus and energy into getting my degree, because the fine print was you have to pay it back and or work it back if you fail. And that wasn't going to be an option. So I put all my focus and energy into my studies, and I felt that he wasn't supporting me because here I am trying to better myself and become a better person and progress. And, in those days I was still corporate driven, and I was neglecting him in our relationship. And so he ended up having an affair. Because his needs weren't being met in the relationship. And then when it all came out and we were going for therapy, I was blaming him for everything that had gone wrong. But you had an affair. You did this to us. And our therapist referred us to Imago relationship therapy. And that was the turning point for me, because this had such a profound impact on me. And I realized then how all my upbringing and everything that had happened and contributed to where I had got to at that point and what had happened throughout my life. And that I couldn't have a healthy connection, attachment to others because I would push it away. And so that's how it all started, and how my therapy and journey started, and then how I got into the work that I'm doing today and why I'm so passionate about human connection, because that's where we feel safe. It's where we feel valued and of worth, and it gives us an identity, and we feel like we belong, and all of those basic things that we should be able to feel naturally.
Yeah. And, I want to talk more about the work that you both do now because of your person and what brought you here. And, we all believers in universe here. There are others out there who might not believe in that kind of stuff. But I just have one more question about the impact of this and the stigma that comes with being a survivor of abuse. And we know society can be ugly. We know society can say, oh, yes, but, how did he not know as a boy? Who can rape a man? Like you say, those questions, Martin. You are asked this. And people know your story because you speak of it openly, right?
I speak of it openly, and in all my years of telling my story, I've had one person come and shame me or try and shame me. But there was an incredible man in my life, Mike Liu. He's kind of the founder of the whole male survivor movement because he wrote the first book on male survivors. And I met Mike and we were chatting one day and I said to him, does it not annoy you when you're busy talking and people are like, because we had a conference at Gibbs and people would move around and be on their phones and I was getting kind of agitated because they're not listening to this man who's like a hero to me, And he said to me, it's their way of dealing with it. And I realized that everybody has their scars and their wounds. And they deal with it in different ways. And I've got to respect the fact that if he wants to zone out and play a game on his phone, well, then let him do that because I'm talking about really tough stuff.
Yeah.
So if somebody attacks me, I don't look at him and go, well, why are you attacking me? I go, what happened to you? Why did my story trigger you in such a tremendous way? It's an interesting story. I was at a friend of mine runs something called the Character Company.
I know.
And, Yaku, and he often gets me in to talk to his mentors about this. And the one day it was like 20 men sitting in a semicircle in front of me, and I'm busy talking to him. And when I talk, I always look at people. I was like, consciously make sure I make eye contact with all of them. And there was this one guy, and every time I spoke to him, he would just... He would fall asleep, but for like a minute. He would just like pass out, boom, finished, And I thought, okay, that's weird. And I would go past him this time, and I would come back and look at him and talk to him, and he'd just fall asleep.
Wow.
Yeah. And eventually I went to him after the talk, and I said to him, I think you and I need to talk. And he says, I'm not ready for those talks yet.
So it was too much for his brain, for his...
And he literally fell asleep for like a minute to 3 minutes. Yeah, bam, out. So something would trigger him and he's just like...
Look at that reaction, eh?
Yeah, amazing. It was one of the most powerful reactions I've ever seen.
That is, because it was so much. It was too much. And do you ever find, and this is I'm just an awkward question. I feel awkward asking it, but do you find with people when you started to tell and this is for both of you, that people, or you felt sometimes, did you ever get the feeling people didn't want you around their children? They didn't want you around their families because...
you first.
No, not for me, because I never used to actually tell my story.
Okay.
Because in my head, I'm like, I've dealt with it. I've been to therapy. I've made peace with it. I've got closure. My saying is, your past doesn't define who you are. You get to define
your patients,
who you are.
Though, the people that you counsel about this, do they speak of this? Is this their experience?
So when they tell me their stories and where there's been abuse and that, obviously I can completely empathize because I've been there and I know what it feels like. I've sat in that space. So it was only really probably about 5, 6, 7 years ago that I actually started vocalizing and telling my story because I realized after, I think, chatting with Martin and a couple of other people, it's like, this is part of me. It's not that I was pretending it didn't happen to me, but it was part of one of those life-defining moments that's contributed to where I am today and the kind of work that I do. And I thought, you know what, if there's any cause that I can be passionate about, that I can speak from the heart from, it is gender-based violence. And not just from a female point of view, but across the spectrum, which is why Martin and I do a lot of work together when we can, because I do believe men's voices are equally important. Absolutely. And we can learn so much.
And we don't hear so many of those voices.
Exactly.
We don't. And Martin, you said yes when I asked if you got the feeling that people didn't want you around their families.
I had, I started talking about this in about 2010 to 2009, 2010, thereabouts. It was that night when I was in my office where Matrix Men was born. I walked out of there and I just started telling everybody. I mean, I don't care who you were. I was going to tell my story, right? And there was a lady, incredibly wealthy family. I was doing some work in their house, and I just told her my story. I'm going to start this organization. We're going to help men. And she was like, why? And I said, because I was abused. Man, her face, it dropped. It was almost like she locked her children in the bedrooms to keep them away from me. It was so funny.
Don't come out when Martin is here.
Don't come out when he's here.
Okay, and keep this knife under your bed. Yeah. Okay.
And so that was like the only negative that I can remember.
Okay.
A lot of people, like I say, when I tell my story, I trigger them. So they get angry with me or they get upset with me or something. But that's fine. I understand that. But you know what? I always say I'm in the business of planting seeds.
Yeah.
That's what I do. I plant seeds. It grows in you. You deal with it the way that you want to.
And, as we wrap up this conversation, I want to know from you, many of us know people in our lives. Some of us think we also have flashbacks of our own. We can't know for sure. How do we get to that point where we start that conversation, where we say, I think, like you can spot it, Martin, because you say you've had people with extreme reactions, and then you have the others the ones that fall asleep and the ones that start fiddling. Yeah. And if you have an inkling of someone in your life, man or woman, and we are talking HeToo, but I mean, Paula brings a different perspective to this as well. If you have an inkling, how do you start that conversation? Or do you always wait for that person? You help men on a daily basis. You run this organization. How do you get them to actually say, admit, first of all, this happened to them? Get to that point. How do you open the door for that?
Yes, I'm not a nice therapist.
Oh.
I'm not.
Do you hold them over water, over a balcony and say, right?
Yeah, not quite. I kind of, when they come to me, I go, you know why you're here, so let's just be honest about it now. Let's talk about it, So it might not be the best approach. So for instance, I had a guy, the HR lady from the company phoned me and said, listen, I believe something happened to this guy and he's on the verge. He was always a model worker, but something happened in December and now he's just off the tracks and he's going to get fired if he carries on like this. Will you talk to him? I was like, fine, but he has to phone me. And he phoned me and he sort of skipped over things and eventually I said, look, we know why you're here, let's talk about it, right? And I got him to eventually say, okay, that's what happened. So he was refeed, date raped, essentially. And he's 28 and he feels so ashamed and all that sort of stuff. And he came and he had one session with me. And after the session, he said, I feel incredible. It was just so nice to be able to talk to somebody who understands. And we were supposed to have another session a week later. It's 3 weeks later, he still hasn't come back. So it's still, even when they do start talking about it, it's still very difficult.
Yeah.
But when something's happened. So if in your relationship, your husband is doing weird things, something's happened to him, And you can't just go to him and say, hey, what happened to you as a child? It doesn't work that way. So I would recommend sending, I've heard about this organization, Matrix Men, why don't you check? It was very interesting. Plant the seeds.
Yeah.
Don't force a response. Don't force a change. Don't force anything. Just plant seeds.
And we need to have those conversations with our sons. And I'm going to say sons because, like I say, we're talking HeToo. And Paula, you can also help with this one. Because I had my own boy, 10 or 11, asking me, but Mom, and they're learning sex education in school. They sent us a note to say, listen, we're going to be talking about this to your child. Just be aware. And he asked me one day, he said, Mom, but, can a boy get raped? How is it possible? And at his young age, he knows that you have to be at a certain physical state for that to happen. I honestly, with all my years of experience and doing parenting shows, I didn't know how to explain this to him. So help me, Martin. Give me the answer so I can write it down.
Is there an answer? So I would always ask them, to what level they would want to know the information, because I made the mistake of giving my daughter too much information when I started this recovery process, and it was too much for her to handle. So you need to be careful what you divulge. So you kind of assess what level of information they want. Do they need the gory details? Probably not. They just go, well, rape is not just between a man and a woman. It can be between a woman and a woman, woman and a man. It can be whoever, Again, another issue that nobody talks about, woman raping women or woman raping girls. Yeah. And you know what it does? It keeps those girls trapped because they think I'm the freak because I'm the only one that this is happening to. And we need to open these discussions so that they too can feel empowered enough to come out and talk about it. But yeah, just start with assess what level of information they want, and then just go,
If I remember correctly, his question was, how can a woman rape a man? I think that was the specifics he wanted.
Well, then I would use the tickle effect. So I use this often because I counsel ladies who feel guilty because they orgasmed or they lubricated whilst being raped. And I always say, well, it's the tickle effect. So if I come and I push you down and I start tickling you, firstly, you feel offended because the stranger's pushed you down and he's tickling you. Are you going to laugh? And they're like, yes, is the general response. And I go, well, that's the same thing. You don't want to laugh, but you do laugh. And that's the same thing. You lubricate or you get erect, especially boys. I mean, if somebody comes and starts touching you there, you're going to get erect anyway, whether you want to or not.
It's a physiological response.
So start with that. And,
All right. And, these podcasts and these chats, Martin and Paula, are so that we can guide others. Even if their children are not listening, they can tell their children what to do, how to react. And you both at that time didn't quite think or realize that what was happening to you was wrong at the time that it was happening. At the time, you felt a little bit of discomfort. But how do we have those conversations with our children? And yes, even older people who may not realize, like we were talking now, Martin, about how is it possible for a woman to rape a man, and he must think, okay, I'm not being raped now, this is just a sexual encounter. How do we, especially with our children, have the conversation? How do we let them know that they should know at this point that this is not something? And yes, we are in 2023. I mean, for you guys, this was way back. It wasn't spoken about so openly, so possibly no way you could have known. But now, with children being exposed to so much and so many different people, there's so much going on in their worlds. How do we let them know? What is the conversation we can have or should be having to let them know if such A, B, and C is happened or done or left you feeling this way? Know that it is not right. Paula?
So this is going to sound really bizarre, but I would want to say that parents need to take responsibility, because sometimes without realizing it, we force children to do things that they're uncomfortable with. For example, we say, go and give Uncle so-and-so a hug or Auntie so-and-so a hug. Yes. We force them into it. And we need to respect that when a child doesn't want to do something, they feel uncomfortable, we don't force them to do it, because what we're actually telling them is they have no control over who can and can't do what to them. So already at that level, we need to respect our children. If they don't want to do something that consists of their body, to respect their space and their boundaries. And then have these conversations with them and remind them that if at any point something is happening to them by anybody and they don't feel comfortable, they create a safe enough space that they can come to you and tell you about it. At the same time, educate them and others around there of the support structures that are out there now, like, for example, the Teddy Bear Clinic for children, like SEDAC, like Lifeline, like Matrix Men, Childline, Power. All of those places now are places that you can reach out to and ask for help if you don't feel like you can turn to your immediate support structure.
And that's the other complication, Martin, from your experience, when that person who's hurting you is your parent. How do...
Yes.
For you couldn't even ask your dad to help you. It wasn't an option. It wasn't, for children, for any adult who's listening that wants to tell a child that this shouldn't be happening.
There's a couple of things here. So for parents that really care, I'm noticing something. For me, it's great to have a 2-year-old again, because I'm learning all these things. And what they're doing at his nursery school is they're teaching them about private parts. And you don't touch somebody else's private parts. And sometimes when I'm changing my son, he goes, private parts, don't touch. And I go, that's right, my boy. And I encourage him. But another thing a parent can do is, like, we always want our children to be happy.
Yeah.
So what is the best part of your day? What did you have fun today? Did you change the narrative? When you pick them up from school, go, so what was the worst part of your day? Tell me about that first. Give them permission to talk about the rubbish, the bad stuff that happens in their lives. We always send the impression that we want everything to be good and fluffy and nice. And life is so wonderful, but we know life sucks sometimes, right? So give them permission to tell you that life sucks, right? So there we go. Then for children that are in abusive relationships with parents especially, we need to just tell stories. I keep saying this. I tell my story to give other men permission to heal. that is why I'm constantly telling my story. And I don't care if people ask me the same questions 1,000 times. I will tell my story over and over and over and over and over again, because it gives other men permission to heal.
What about children who are doing this to other children?
Yeah, that is unfortunately huge growth at the moment. So
there's so much nursey doctor you can play until it becomes past that,
yes,
or house game or whatever it is.
So what happens is it's essentially children are just role modeling what's happened to them, and they're doing it to their friends. Okay. It's over, but that's exploding. And we have the internet, and parents give their children phones at 9 years old, and they are absolutely insane. Don't do it. We need to get real about what happens on the internet. There's pornography. The other day I was just looking around, and I was like, Google Play has some of the most disgusting games on it available to anybody who's got a phone.
Yeah.
I was just like, seriously, is this all available? And we're looking at internet trafficking. We're looking at sextortion, which is growing exponentially. They estimate it to be a 58 billion rand a year industry, $1 billion a year industry. So there's these things. So, we allow other people to parent our children. Teachers have to teach our children this.
Devices parent our children.
Devices have to parent our children, and we can't be that removed from it anymore. Right. We have to be actively involved in our children's upbringing.
If you're a parent, be a parent.
Be a parent. Yes. Put blockers on
Not just phones. A breeder, be a parent. That's what it is.
But also talk to them.
Yeah. I told my kids, I said, guys, I'm talking to a guy called Martin today, and this is the story he's going to tell me. They just went very quiet. Like they couldn't believe, that this would happen to a man. And I'm obviously going to be asked for the feedback when I pick them up later. So I'll give them the feedback, and I would be happy for them to listen to this, because it's what it is. It is what it is. And as my final question to both of you, as survivors and healers, that's what you are, healers, Paula. Just a last word out there to those who are listening, those who are survivors like yourself, or going through this at the moment, that there is life after abuse, that you can go on to live a normal life. It is relative, and I don't want to say normal, to go and live your best life. It is possible.
It's a damn sight more normal than what they're living
More
right
normal
now.
than what they're living. So both of you, and just, if you want to give me your answer separately, together, jump in, whatever it is, let's have it.
So I think for me, it's more to understand that it wasn't your fault, that what happened to you was not with your permission or consent, and that doesn't define who you are. You get to define who you are going forward, and you can either use that as a weapon to thrive going forward, or you can choose, and it's going to sound harsh, you can choose to be the victim, where it is going to control your life.
Martin?
Same thing. So many people get comfortable in their victimhood. It's like, well, this always happens to me. I'm such a, you have to feel sorry for me. And they gain a lot of
It's a comfortable place to be.
Yeah, it's a comfortable place to be. And they gain a lot of affirmation from being the victim, always being in hospital, always being sick, always having bad things happen to you. But at the end of the day, it's because you're freaking dysfunctional. Really? Sorry. I'm very straightforward.
That's
I told
fine.
you, I'm not a nice therapist, right? So face life and be real. But the thing is, what we live with is the guilt. It's my fault it happened. We live with the construct that I somehow did something when I was 5 years old to attract that person to do what they did to me. And we quite often blame ourselves for what happened. And we need to get to that point where we go, actually, that's why in my groups, when guys start talking about that, we start with them, when that thing happened to me, I go, what is that thing? Well, when they hurt me. No, what did they do to you? Well, they did something to me. And I go, no, call it what it is, because you start changing the narrative in your brain. If I say that thing that happened to me, or I say he raped me, there's a very distinct difference in it. When he rapes me, it's a crime he did to me. If it's a thing that happened, it's something I could have been complicit in. So I kind of almost forced them to say no.
So it's the shame and the guilt, you reckon, that keeps most men. I know with women and women, we've heard about the shame and the guilt that keeps them from actually facing this head on, just facing it.
Yeah. Another thing for the men is, of course, because society doesn't talk about it. I was telling the guys outside earlier, when I was 16, I went to a rape crisis center, and I walked in there, and all that confronted me with these massive posters of girls being hurt and men hurting women, and And nowhere in that rape crisis centre did it tell my story. There wasn't one picture of a boy as a victim. There wasn't one woman raping a boy anywhere. So I kind of walked out and I went, well, I'm the freak. There's something wrong with me. I'm the only person it's happening to, and I left. And my options were alcohol. So I drank.
And dysfunctional relationships. And we've heard with Paula's story and yours, it's not that there's no difference. No. There's no difference in the impact. There's no difference in the shame and the guilt, Paula. And it's just more men like Martin need to come out and tell us their story.
Absolutely. And that's why we do the work across the gender spectrum, because we experience things the same, but sometimes differently. And we can learn so much from each other, and we can heal together as well.
I always say if you include all victims, we'll be able to sort this out.
Sort it out.
Really will. And I kid you not. I mean, if we allow, in South Africa, 44% of all boys have suffered sexual abuse by the age of 18.
And that's a huge number.
Huge.
That's huge. And we got to break the cycle as well.
In fact, more boys are raped in this country than girls every year.
They just don't know it. Some don't know it or don't admit it or don't want to face it.
Yes.
Thank you, Martin and Paula. I can't even describe how I feel right now. I don't know. I mean, I didn't tear like you did because I said this whole podcast then was just going to crumble and go pear-shaped. So I had to keep it together, but I feel my tears coming now.
Done well.
Save me, Martin. Save me. Very quickly tell us where we can find Matrix Men.
So, we're on all social media, Matrix Men. We're based in Craigle Park, so our office is there, 28 Grosvenor Road. It's a construction site at the moment, so please don't rush there. Phone me, WhatsApp me, 081 430 4445. And don't phone. I might be counselling or whatever. Just WhatsApp me and I'll get back to you. Yeah.
Thank you both. Thank you both for your honesty and the starkness of it all. And there was Paula, you shocked me. I'm not going to say no shock value because I've known you for so many years and I didn't know this. But yes, and I'm from the bottom of my heart and from the bottom of the hearts of everyone here in Syntropy, because, I don't think you've only helped just one person today. I think it's probably thousands.
Well, I guess this is why we do it, right?
It might not be instantly, but even if it's a year or two from now and somebody goes, I heard that podcast and now's my time. So, friends, we're not short of stories, yes, of course, of the horrors inflicted on our women and girls, but the stories of our boys and men who suffer equally heinous crimes are few and far between. And that's not because they're not happening. It's because very few males who are sexually abused or violated are able to tell their stories for various reasons, as we heard today. We have to be grateful that men like Martin Pelders speak openly about their trauma, even when the unthinkable has happened and the perpetrators are their very own mothers. It's difficult to wrap your mind around that, I know, but there are many stories like Martin's out there. The perpetrators aren't strangers, but mothers, grandmothers, wives, sisters even, nannies, your mother's best friend, your neighbor, and your teachers. But as Martin has told us, and as Paula has told us today, you can go on to live and help others do the same. Till the next time here on Syntropy.